There are some careers, and actually my career in government reflected this to some extent, where self-care is built into the schedule in the sense that projects had downtime or work days were designed in particular ways in order to account for family needs or other responsibilities. In the academy, there's a lot of flexibility in how people use their time, and that is a real advantage to the people working within the academy. The flip side of that is that like work can also happen at any hour of any day, really. And so it creates this weird tension between how do I take time away when there's always something to do? There's always an experiment that I could be overseeing or running, always an email to respond to, something I could write. And we tend to reward people in the academy for doing more and more and more. I mean, certainly my promotions are in part because my job has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. People get grants because they publish. So there is this paradigm in which we support this notion of unlimited productivity and success. So that is actually not sustainable for most humans, if not all humans. So the importance of talking about self-care is essentially giving people permission to figure out what works for them, or at least that's the mentoring model that I take. I do have some employees and some postdocs who are very, very driven, and it's not up to me to kind of control their ambition, but it is up to me to say, from where I sit and the power I hold, you are in the driver's seat of what you accomplish. And so you've laid out very ambitious goals. Have you thought about, the implications of that in terms of everything else that you're responsible for? So I'm there to lead with curiosity, to create the opportunity for folks to make the choices that serve them. I can't prescribe resilience, I can't prescribe self-care, but I can encourage it and model it where I can, bearing in mind what I said about my job being bigger and bigger and bigger. So, I mean, it's a work in progress for all of us, but I think the critical part is, are we thinking about it, or are we just aimlessly and mindlessly kind of pursuing success with no purpose? And I think that is what I hope postdocs take away from conversations about resilience and self-care.
Work-life integration is especially important because we are human. We don't leave ourselves at home. Likewise, we don't leave our work interests at work. So it would be a little silly to think that we have to separate those. So because they're not separate, we have to really actively work to integrate them, right? And what happens, though, is that my idea of work-life balance and productivity are very different than, say, yours or, say, my PIs, say, or my mentees. So we have to actively have those conversations. We have to actively say, what does work-life balance mean to you? What does that look like and feel like to you? For example, there are countries even now, and even some work in ours, to try to create the 9-to-5 workspace, right? That says that you have to leave at 5. And that would be horrible for me. That's just not how I work. I like to be able to do yoga at noon, but then I also like to be able to do some stuff at night because that's where maybe how I think. So to be able to clarify that with my PI and to be able to understand what that looks like, we have to ask, what would success look like to you? What are your expectations of this position? What are your expectations of me coming in? And then let's say we have a disagreement. Let's say this is not working for either of us. What is the best way to tell you and have that conversation? We also see this with PIs too, who are quite busy. So sometimes being able to say, let's say you're really busy. What is the best way to have that conversation? Because I want to honor your work-life balance as well. And yet, I know there are certain aspects and expectations of me. So when this happens, because it naturally does, how do we have that conversation? And what is the best way to give and receive feedback between the two of us?
So I created a mentoring compact for postdocs. It's a variation of one that I created for graduate students. And because I felt like that was, at least for my style, it was easier for me to write out my thoughts on the topic and give that to them as a starter piece for discussion, rather than me just trying to create it, on the spot, or tell it to them on the spot. So I actually provide that to postdoc candidates, as a conversation starter, and I think that most have found that helpful. And the it's a fairly comprehensive guide. It's about 8 pages long, and the topic of productivity, the topic of self care, the topic of communication. Those are all, I think, three of the 8 main topics that are in the document. And so, in it, I emphasize that they're responsible for their own productivity. Of course, they can't be responsible for all parts of it, but that they're in the driver's seat primarily, and that I'm there to offer counsel and guidance, but not immediate answers all the time. That I'm there to help them identify resources that they need, help them clear barriers. And then I'd also let them know that I'm not going to tell them in each meeting, I think your productivity level is on track, but rather that sort of the assumption is that the default assumption is that they are doing well. I will provide them positive feedback in general, if I think things are going well, but that basically they don't need to live in a state of anxiety as to whether or not they're being productive enough, that if I feel that they have sort of slipped off, that I would let them know. And that has happened sometimes. And then that opens the door for conversations about, what is going on, and, are there barriers they're encountering that, that I can help with? Are there things that, they just want some privacy on, and, kind of discuss kind of, what seems reasonable in terms of allowance for that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, mental health struggles are not to be taken lightly. And I think that absolutely, it's something that I'm very upfront, I think, with all members of my group, that this is not an area where I've received much training, but that there are other people on campus who have, and who are very good and who are used to kind of exactly the general types of challenges that students, postdocs, and others are dealing with. So I do try to let my postdocs know about those resources. I also try to find out and make sure that find out what sort of support systems they have without being too invasive, but and also to try to help them grow a network that can support them, not just in strictly professional terms, but also kind of more broadly speaking, more sort of personal terms as well. And so that can be connecting them with alumni of my group. That can be connecting them with other postdocs in the field, junior faculty, more senior faculty, just so they feel like they have a community that they can rely on, who might have similar experiences and some sage advice.